There is a child still living inside you, not the one who laughed without reason, but the one who learned to hide when the world stopped listening. That child is not gone. It simply learned silence, and in that silence it grew powerful. Every time you withdraw from love, every time you sabotage the very thing you long for, that child pulls the strings, not out of malice, but because long ago it learned that safety lives in distance. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." He was speaking of the shadow, but the shadow is not a monster. It is the wounded child behind the mask. You see, the human soul has a way of splitting itself. The moment we experience shame, rejection, or heartbreak, a fracture appears, a line barely visible at first, but over time it becomes a chasm. One side learns how to please, perform, and survive. The other is exiled, carrying the rage, the fear, the need to be loved. And so we grow older, but we do not grow whole. We learn to smile on command, to succeed without joy, to chase admiration instead of intimacy. We become adults wearing armor made of expectations, but inside the child still trembles, still waits to be seen. This is the paradox of the human psyche. The more we repress the past, the more it rules the present. We call it destiny, we call it personality, but often it's just the echo of a small voice we've forgotten how to hear. You may think you've outgrown that child, but listen closely when you're alone. It speaks in your insecurities, in the anger you can't explain, in the endless need to prove yourself. That is the sound of the unconscious, asking to be remembered. Because the shadow does not want to destroy you, it wants to come home. And so begins the journey, not of becoming more perfect, but of becoming more whole. The awakening is not a rising light, but the courage to descend, to meet the child you left behind and whisper the words they've been waiting a lifetime to hear. You were never the problem, you were the beginning. We live in an age of bright surfaces. Screens glow, smiles shine, and success is measured by the speed of the applause. But beneath the filtered light, something restless moves, a quiet ache, a loneliness that no achievement can soothe. We have mistaken performance for peace. We tell ourselves that if we work harder, earn more, love better, look happier, then maybe the unease will fade. But the soul does not speak in numbers or achievements. It speaks in wounds. And the more we ignore it, the louder it becomes. Carl Jung called it repression, the burying of what feels unacceptable, the pain too heavy to carry, the anger too dangerous to show, the longing that once burned too brightly. We push it all into the shadows, believing we are freeing ourselves from the past. But what is buried alive does not die, it waits. The modern self is taught to move forward, never inward. We glorify letting go, but we misunderstand what that means. We think it means forgetting, but true letting go is remembering without fear. We scroll through endless advice about positivity, yet rarely do we sit in silence and ask, what is this ache trying to tell me? There is a tyranny in false light. A world that celebrates constant optimism has no room for healing. We are told that sadness is weakness, that vulnerability is indulgence, that anger must be tamed. So we compress until the soul becomes a clenched fist, and in that tension the forgotten child stirs. It shows itself not in tears, but in patterns. The relationships that repeat the same pain, the dreams that end just as they begin. The voice that whispers, "You're not enough," even when the world says you are. We think we are making choices, but often we are reenacting old wounds. A rejection today is not just a rejection, it's the echo of every no that came before. A conflict with a lover isn't just about them, it's the unfinished story of a child who once felt unseen. And so we run faster. We fill the silence with noise. We call it ambition. We call it progress, but deep down we are terrified of stillness, because stillness is where the truth lives. There is a mirror inside each of us, not made of glass, but memory. Most of us look away, afraid of what it will show, yet that mirror is the only place we can meet ourselves fully. The struggle, then, is not between light and dark, it is between honesty and denial, between the life we perform and the one that quietly pleads to be lived. Look closely at your own life. When do you feel most alive? And when do you feel like an actor repeating someone else's script? Those questions are not small. They are doorways, because behind every mask of composure, behind every polite smile that hides exhaustion, there is a story asking to be spoken. The pain you hide is not your enemy. It is your compass. It points toward the place where you lost yourself. But to follow it, to truly follow it, you must first be willing to descend, down into the silence, down into the dark, down to the place where the child you forgot still waits, holding the key to your freedom. And it is there, in that descent, that the revelation begins. There comes a moment when the pretending collapses, when the smile no longer holds, when the noise of the world fades, and you are left in a quiet so deep it feels like meeting yourself for the first time. This is where most people turn away, because silence is dangerous. It strips away illusion. It reveals the raw truth beneath the performance. But this is also where transformation begins. Carl Jung called this confrontation with the unconscious the night sea journey. It is the descent into one's own darkness, not to destroy the self, but to rescue what has been lost within it. And when you dare to enter, you find that the monsters you feared are not strangers at all. They are the parts of you that were once rejected, misunderstood, or shamed into silence. They wear the faces of fear, envy, anger, and guilt. But beneath those masks are the most sacred fragments of who you are. The shadow is not evil. It is unlived life. Think of it as the hidden half of a great moon, the part you cannot see, yet which gives the light its shape. Without the darkness, the light has no form, no contrast, no meaning. When you repress your shadow, you lose depth. You become one-dimensional, a smiling ghost drifting through a world that rewards appearances. But when you turn toward your shadow, something extraordinary happens. The very energy you feared begins to serve you. Anger becomes assertiveness. Jealousy becomes admiration in disguise. Fear becomes clarity. Sadness becomes compassion. What once ruled you from the dark now becomes part of your strength. This is the revelation Jung was pointing to. That wholeness, not goodness, is the goal of the soul. That integration, not perfection, is the true path to peace. We spend our lives trying to be better. But better, in the language of the psyche, means complete. It means bringing the light and the dark together. The adult and the child, the saint and the sinner, the dreamer and the doubter. Until you can look in the mirror and say, all of this is me. Because every attempt to deny the shadow is an act of war against yourself. And peace can never be found by destroying your own army. Jung once wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To make the darkness conscious, that is the highest act of courage. It is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to see clearly despite it. And when you do, when you finally sit across from your own shadow and listen without judgment, something ancient stirs within you. The feeling of reunion, the return to something you never truly lost. Because the truth is, you cannot heal what you will not face, and you cannot face what you refuse to love. Love, then, is not just for others. It is the light you hold up to your own wounds. It is the voice that says, you are allowed to be broken and beautiful at the same time. This is not self-help. It is self-return. To integrate the shadow is to reclaim your story. To say to every rejected emotion, every silenced need, every forgotten dream, you belong. And slowly, the inner chaos begins to quiet. The child who once hid in fear looks up and sees you not as the enemy, but as the guardian they've been waiting for. That is the revelation. Not that the darkness disappears, but that it no longer controls you. You walk with it, you learn from it, and in that union you discover something profound. The light was never outside you. It was simply hidden beneath the parts you were too afraid to love. Awareness is not enough. The moment you see your shadow, your life will begin to rearrange itself around that vision. Every relationship, every ambition, every silence will ask you one question. Will you live what you now know? This is where integration begins. Not in thought, but in courage. The courage to act from wholeness instead of fear. Carl Jung believed that confronting the shadow is not a single event, but a lifelong dialogue between the seen and unseen. To integrate it means to walk consciously into the world, carrying both your light and your darkness with dignity. In practice, it starts small. When you feel anger rising, you pause, not to suppress it, but to listen. What is this emotion protecting? What truth is it trying to express? You name it, you honor it, and suddenly the emotion softens, because it is finally being seen. That is the first transformation. Awareness turns reaction into understanding. The second is humility. You begin to see that others are not your enemies, but mirrors reflecting your own disowned parts. The arrogance fades. You no longer need to prove your worth, because you have met the part of you that once doubted it. This changes everything. The way you lead, the way you love, the way you forgive. In relationships, integration means recognizing projection. When you accuse someone of being selfish, ask if it is your own unloved need speaking. When you fall into admiration or resentment, look for what part of yourself you see in them. The world becomes less of a battlefield and more of a mirror for self-discovery. In solitude, integration takes a different form. It becomes honesty. You stop pretending to be who you wish you were and start becoming who you are, piece by piece, breath by breath. You stop chasing light and start embodying it. Even in leadership, whether over others or over your own destiny, the shadow holds wisdom. A true leader does not reject their flaws, they learn to use them wisely. They know their ambition can become greed. Their empathy can become martyrdom. Their discipline can become control, so they stay watchful, balanced, human. That is integration in motion, the art of walking the narrow bridge between light and dark without denying either. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The shadow is that impediment. The wound that blocks you is the same wound that points you home. Transformation happens when you stop running from the obstacle and begin to see that it is your teacher. And yet, this journey will humble you. You will lose versions of yourself you once thought were permanent. You will outgrow people, habits, and stories that no longer align with your truth. It will hurt, not because you are failing, but because you are shedding what is false. To integrate the shadow is not to become flawless. It is to become real. It is to live without splitting yourself into good and bad, to wake each morning knowing that all of you is welcome. And in time, you will notice something subtle but unmistakable, a calm that wasn't there before. The inner war quiets, decisions feel cleaner, even your silence begins to speak differently. Not of suppression, but of peace. You realize the shadow is not a burden to fix, but a guide to follow. It is the part of you that remembers truth when the rest of you forgets. And when you can walk with that, when you can hold light in one hand and darkness in the other, you finally become whole. There comes a quiet after the storm. Not the silence of emptiness, but the stillness of return. You stand now where the journey began, but you are no longer the same. The light feels softer, the darkness less frightening, because you have learned that both live within you and always have. The child you forgot no longer hides. They walk beside you now, not as a wound but as a companion. You no longer fight the tides of emotion. You listen. You no longer chase meaning. You embody it. The shadow does not disappear. It becomes a rhythm, a pulse that keeps you human. It reminds you of where you've been and anchors you in compassion for where others are. That is the final truth of Jung's philosophy. Healing is not about perfection, but reconciliation. The self does not evolve by rejection, but by integration, by saying yes to every forgotten part. We spend so much of life trying to escape ourselves, but freedom is not escape. It is acceptance. It is realizing that the light you seek is not ahead of you, but beneath the layers of your own denial. When you finally meet your shadow with grace, you stop asking life to be easier and start asking to be more aware. You stop seeking control and begin seeking presence. You stop trying to be good and start trying to be whole. The war within you ends not in victory, but in understanding. And from that understanding emerges a quieter strength, the kind that no one sees, but everyone feels. It is the strength of someone who knows themselves, who has walked through their own fire and returned carrying light. In that moment you realize you were never broken, you were never unworthy, you were simply divided, waiting to be remembered. So listen, when life feels heavy, when old wounds whisper in your chest, don't turn away. They are not punishments, they are invitations. They are echoes of the child within, still calling you home. And when you finally answer, when you turn, not in fear but in love, you will hear it clearly, as if spoken by your own soul. I never left you. I was just waiting for you to see me again.